And can I just first of all say, welcome everyone who's made it here. And as you can see, we're using the Hoppen kind of system to launch our newest center. And I've got our co-launchers here, some of our staff who contributed to the center. And we're going to, hopefully by the end of the session, you will get to know us a bit more. So first of all, welcome. This is our new Center for Creative Industries and Creative Communities. And as we wrote in our sort of inaugural pitches for the center, that it's not just about the arts, but it's through the arts. And, you know, I'm probably talking for the whole panel that we believe that our work supports how we as a society can live more creative lives. And of course, we know that with those creative lives, we live better and we live happier. So that's what our center is about. And we of course welcome everyone who wants to contact us to come to our website, come to our events, and you know, get in contact with us to work with us together. So hopefully by the end of this session, you will maybe get to know us a bit more. So as I mentioned, and I see that my housekeeping slides come up there. If you have technical difficulties, just, of course, rebooting always helps. We do realize that the Chrome browser seems to be more reliable than any other browser, but it should work. And if you want to communicate with us, there is a chat session on the chat sort of window on the left. And just to point out that Hoppen works that you see on the right, sorry, not on the left, on the right, you see that there's an event chat and there's a session chat. And of course, at the moment, we are in the session, and we can see the session chat as part of the session. But you can also go to the whole sort of conference chat and you see the chat there. But hopefully in the next couple of hours, you also take the opportunity to browse around. We've put a lot of stuff in the expo area with a lot of films, documentaries, performances, and we will keep that open until 8:30 this evening. And of course, at 6 o'clock, we're going to open the virtual pub. Until then, we also have some virtual lounges, tea rooms, and coffee areas where you can also turn on your camera and turn on your mic. So the lineup that we're going to do, we're going to talk 20 minutes about our research, or sorry, 50 minutes about our research just now. And then we're going to browse through the expo area, and that's only 20 minutes. And after 20 minutes, we're going to come back to the concluding panel. And that concluding panel is just 20 minutes. And any questions that you have, you can put in the question and answer sections or in the chat. But after that, we still keep the whole conference open for another 2.5 hours. We will be there with our virtual beers and virtual coffees. And you're welcome to join us and still browse through the whole expo area just to have a nosy of what our researchers, artists, professionals are actually doing that are associated to the center. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to, first of all, find the place where I stop sharing. So you'll see, hi Neil, so you've made it, brilliant. So we only have lost one member. So Anna will join us when she joins us. This is always something about the tech that always happens. But I'm going to just get the panel to introduce themselves. And I told them that we only have 3 minutes per introduction, and they can tell something about themselves and their practice. We're going to do another round after that where we talk about the projects, but now just a short introduction about themselves and their practice, their creative and research practice. And I'm going to go down the list that I have here. So Neil, you're first. So 3 minutes, and I've got a timer here, I have to say.
I think it'll be less than 3 minutes, so brief. Yeah. Hi, I'm Neil Brownsword. I'm Professor of Ceramics. My research practice for over 2 decades now has mediated transitions within Stoke-on-Trent ceramic manufacturing sector, following recent decades of global economics and the impact of new technology. It reflects upon the significance of people and their practices affected by these transitions through perspectives of artistic research. Whilst outsourcing and advancements in production technology have massively reduced labour-intensive manufacturing, My research explores a re-evaluation of craft knowledge that once fashioned material objects in particular ways. Its questions consider, should traditional practices displaced from contemporary production be simply relegated to history or the trails of the heritage sector? Or do they offer fertile territory to unravel new modes of thinking and creativity in a digital age? It addresses these questions via a broad range of material expressions and methods, including site-specific installation, film, social practice, and reenactment. And it offers an alternative to traditional text-based discourse concerning industrial change, commonly addressed by economists, historians, and other academics. Thank you.
Fabulous, fabulous. And if I may, so we had this chat yesterday, didn't we? That, you know, I always find it fascinating that the creative processes allow meaning to be really put into things which might seem mundane, like this notion of dirt or clay, which is very mundane, or food. And then a creative process attaches that to heritage and people and connections and places. And you know, something comes out of that, which is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I suppose we kind of bring to light the overlooked
yeah,
within things.
Absolutely. Right, I'm going to go to Peter Rutsch.
Thanks, Carola. I'm sorry you can't see me. For some reason, my camera decided it wasn't going to work immediately as I came into the room. So, but there you go. That's technology. So I'm an associate professor here at Staffordshire Uni within the Media and Performance Department. And my background is in film production as a screenwriter and a producer. I've worked in the industry for around 30 years, starting off in Hollywood, working with the major studios, and then back here in the UK as an independent producer. And more recently, I've been interested in supporting creative entrepreneurship, particularly in regions outside of major cities, so in towns, in rural areas, semi-rural areas, and also internationally in island states. And my research has always had a close connection to industry. And when I moved to Staffordshire Uni, I started having conversations with local filmmakers and local government about how we could support, in particular, our film and media graduates to stay in the area and build their careers here, which at the time was something that seemed really rather far-fetched, given that Stoke had this incredible international reputation for its ceramics, but absolutely nothing for its film production. That really started to change when I got involved with a film. This was back in 2005. I was part of a producer team making a film about Northern soul music in the 1970s, and we were looking for somewhere to base the production and to shoot. And I spoke to the university executive about putting a partnership together to bring the production to Stoke and to base the whole production at the College Road campus in the city. And that really was a great success, and it sparked a lot of interest in bringing more films to the city and supporting productions coming in, but also our producers and filmmakers in the city. And my work then over the last 15 years or so has really focused on how we can build those kind of strong, sustainable, creative economies in these kind of regions, in regions where you wouldn't normally perhaps expect film production and creative production to happen and be sustainable. And I did that really through looking at the concepts of clusters and the relationships between industry and education and government, and specifically how creative clusters could work in these rural or semi-rural communities. So it was pushing back a little against the idea of creative economies only working in major urban centres. And that really then led on to some of the projects that I'm going to talk about later.
Nice. Wow. With 10 seconds to go, I was just going to put up that. Well done. And of course, and I know your work is so much about partnerships, so we've heard about from Neil the sort of connectivity to the places, and from you, the notion of partnership work. And I want to go to Anna next. And I see that Anna has made it. So we'll see you probably at the moment you're mute. So you have to turn on your microphone. And just a few words to introduce yourself. We're going to do a second round with projects, but just to introduce yourself and your practice. You're on mute. So shall we'll just go to, see if you can figure it out, Anna. We're just going to go to Mark next.
Oh, hello, my turn. Sure. So I'm Mark Estibero. I'm an associate professor of music here at Staffordshire University. I'm also a composer. I play the guitar, and I also, to a lesser extent, play the piano. My research practice focuses on composition for acoustic instruments and combining that with electronic elements. So I compose for traditional orchestral instruments and other acoustic instruments using quite conventional methods, and then I extend these with extended instrumental techniques and other less conventional approaches, and then I combine that with bespoke electronic patches, which I design myself. So I write my own software, although I don't really consider myself to be a programmer. I use a package called Max 8, and more recently I've been working with a package called Super Collider, which is a text-based programming language. So I'm interested in extending the range of acoustic instruments and exploring the boundaries between the acoustic sound of the instruments and the electronic sound. I'm also interested in issues of control, agency, interface design, and so on. And I've presented papers on this at various conferences. I'm also looking at ways to combine electronics and extended techniques on traditional scores. So creating graphical scores, creating new fonts, and combining that with traditional notation, and so on. The thing I enjoy most is working with live, real human being musicians as opposed to computers, although I enjoy the computer side of it as well. So I'm always looking for ideas of taking these ways of taking these ideas out of academia into the wider community. In 2019, for example, I took part in an Arts Council funded project with my colleague Dave Paling, who will talk in a minute, to create an audio-visual work for a local brass band, which was then presented at Middleport Pottery and also at the Zurich University of the Arts. And that explored the legacy of the potteries industry using narrative voices, live electronics, audio visuals, and a bass clarinet, which was enhanced with sensors. And I'm looking for other opportunities as well to explore this. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know that you're going to also talk about some projects which actually have an additional, not just an interdisciplinary, but additional placemaking aspect to that as well. But I'm going to go maybe right to Dave, and just in between, Anna, there is a sort of microphone muting button at the bottom, but maybe you have to click it up at the top. You have to allow the browser to use a mic. That might be the issue as well. But we're going to go on to Dave. Over to you.
Hi, thanks, Carola. Yeah, so I work with Mark in the Media and Performance Department. I'm professor in electronic music. We're also in the Music and Sound Department, so we teach on the courses related to music composition, music performance, music production, and also sound design. My background is in music composition, mostly kind of popular music side, I suppose, with an electronic slant as well. I've not really performed for quite a long time, but I'm hoping to get back into that, actually. More on that later. But ever since getting into music, it's kind of involved the use of computers as well. And kind of about the same time I was getting into sequencing. the technologies became available to create visuals as well. So I've had this ongoing relationship really between sound and image and how they can be used together. Initially in performance, but more recently in fixed media compositions. Also before that, I got into something called sonification and auditory display. That's using sound to display information. And that was quite a technical subject because my other background is actually electronic engineering. I kind of got a little bit disillusioned with that because it became a bit too sciencey. And my more recent work is a lot more artsy, I must say. So for the last few years and throughout my PhD, which I finished in 2014, actually, it's quite a while back now, I've worked almost exclusively in a discipline I refer to as visual music composition, using abstract imagery, electronic sound to create fixed media compositions. And these look at the relationships between sound and image to try and find a common ground, really, to create a cohesive piece of art, I suppose, rather than it being a film with a soundtrack. It's looking at trying to generate some cohesive properties between the whole audiovisual experience. A few ways of doing this. So I do use what I refer to as parametric mapping, a mechanical way of converting between medium. So using software tools to maybe input an audio file and have that trigger response in the image, much like you might expect in a visualizer. And then the other side of the scale is the composer's interpretation and rendition, where you might have a higher level
10 seconds.
All right, higher level, thanks, Carol. Higher level concept to what the piece might be about. I'm also on the editorial team for a journal called Dance Cult, and I'm trying to interweave these ideas and interests. Okay,
fabulous, brilliant. And I'm just going to move us on. I know that Anna just left the room. She's trying it out in our tea room, so you might actually see her there in the break. But we're going to sort out the tech there. Agata, can I hand over to you?
So Agata Rulkowska, I'm a senior lecturer in film production. Now my background is perhaps a bit complicated in really interdisciplinary. So I did work quite a few years doing photography, but I also did acting, painting. I even did singing, installations and things like that. Although film is really the only thing I studied. So I had 3.5 degrees in different forms of filmmaking. When I say 3.5, because my PhD was actually in Iberian and Latin American studies, even though it was a practice-based PhD where I used film as a method. Now, because of this, the thing I'm really interested is using all these creative methods for research. So the idea of practice-based research, but also the tension it creates when you work with, especially for someone coming from a very, very artistic background, in a situation where I would work in a very controlled environment. For example, in terms of photography, we're talking about studio environment with models and kind of conceptual ideas which you can develop over an extensive period of time. And what happens when you use the same methods when you work in a documentary filmmaking, which is really, really very different, very uncontrolled, if you like, and when your outcome is just really completely somewhere else, your priorities as well. And another thing I'm interested in is a question of audiences. So I spent quite a lot of time researching film festivals and other forms of dissemination. So again, how the context of presentation changes the meaning of the artwork. So what happens when you place a documentary film in a gallery space, and how does it change the meaning? What kind of audiences can we reach? And finally, I really am interested in, similarly to Peter and Fiona, to working in terms of small work with small communities, and this idea of decolonizing local knowledge, and by extension, in relation to what we're doing here, is the idea of decolonizing the curriculum. And I'm going to talk more about it once we get to talk about projects. So thank you.
Fabulous, fabulous. And of course, what comes out is, the connectivity of some of our work, but also the interdisciplinarity of our work, and the connectivity between places, people, but also between different kinds of disciplines and makers, doers, and then the audience that participate in that. So I'm going to bring Fiona in. I know that her camera also doesn't work. We've got two individuals which have two cameras, and one camera doesn't seem to be recognized by the Hopin system. So we could see what is to the back of their screen, but not to the front. So, but we've got your picture there. So over to you, Fiona.
It's rather frustrating, but it doesn't matter. I'm here, Carola, and that's the main thing. Well, thank you very much anyway for this wonderful event that you've actually set up. So my name is Fiona Graham. I'm an associate professor in film technology, but I'm also a producer and I'm a writer. And my background over 30 years now has always been trying to give people a voice. And I think that's always been a passion of mine from a very early age, is to actually work within communities. So I started in newspapers and I moved on to BBC Radio, and then worked in various different channels from Sky to ITV and BBC across the UK. And it's always been that passion to actually be able to allow people to have that voice, to work with the public, and to be able to create new content that people can understand and see directly. And I think one of the things that I'm going to look at as part of my research was looking into creating a model which was called Production House, which we've been using here at the university for a number of years. And that's really trying to have this co-collaborative method together to create new knowledge together, to be able to get information out there to the public as quickly as possible. And we've had a number of different test cases that we've worked with over the years with that. We've worked with local charities here, for example, with House of Bread in Stafford. We've worked with St. Giles's Church locally as well. And a lot of our work has also been in Europe. So we've worked with communities in Poland around Auschwitz. We've worked with people within France as well, with a number of World War I and World War II sites there too. So it's really working together. And I think one of the interesting things from my perspective, because I'm also a development producer in television, is that when you're working to a channel and you're working to a commission and trying to get ideas out there, you're actually directed in certain ways because of funding and certain structures that are in place. And what I've been trying to do with Production House is break that down so that you can actually own that voice yourself and you're able to tell your story yourself. And we can help you to do that together and look at different funding streams to enable that. The interesting thing as well, just to finish with myself, is that I'm also a Staffordshire girl too. I haven't been here for many years, and I went round the houses and I came back here, but I was actually born in Baswich, went up to Newcastle upon Tyne, so you can hear a bit of Geordie that actually comes out within that. But I have strong connections to this county, which I'm very proud of too. So we like to actually work with very much practice-based research with what I'm actually doing and looking at these new platforms. As I say, coming back to myself as an associate professor of film technology, it's trying to create new methods and new narratives together to get that to the public as soon as possible and tell those stories. At the end of the day, it's about voices, it's about people, it's about community and stories. That's what I am, a storyteller at the end of the day.
Lovely. So a real co-creative process as such.
Absolutely. It's absolutely all working together.
And I know that your practice is also interesting in the sense that film might always be normally perceived as us filming something like dealing with forensic science, dealing with archaeology, but actually the practice of the making the film needs a research process as well to understand how do you get that co-creative process going. And I know we use that sort of metaphor between a sweetie and a wrapper, and the sweetie is the content, maybe the archaeology content, and the wrapper is the film, but actually the wrapper needs as much research in order to make that sweetie and wrapper as a wholesome good. Sort of new knowledge comes out of there. How do you do that rather than just seeing it as a wrapper without the need to do the research?
Absolutely. It's absolutely bringing that narrative together, isn't it? It's that co-creation process, the process allowing that filmic narrative to pull that creation of new content through this participatory and community focused line of inquiry, so that, you know, this content is tailored to any affected community, whether that's a community here in the region or if that's a community in Europe too.
Fabulous. So Anna, shall we see if you can unmute yourself?
I don't know. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? That's amazing.
Yes, well done.
You,
so 3 introduction. We're going to go to projects afterwards, but just an introduction to yourself and your practice.
Okay, great. So I'm really pleased to finally be here. My name's Anna Francis, and I'm Associate Professor of Fine Art and Social Practice. And I'm actually down in Cornwall right now with the Portland In Project, which I'm going to be talking about later on. My practice, I've been really looking at Stoke-on-Trent as a city and thinking about the role of the artist and arts organisations in the development of place, really, since 2005. I've curated a number of exhibitions around the theme of the artist and the city since then, and really it's a social arts practice working with communities around Stoke-on-Trent and beyond. And when I do work outside of the city, it's always with a kind of a view to thinking about what the external context might bring to us here in Stoke and opportunities for us to out, but also to learn from other places. I've been talking for many years about the way that in some respects Stoke-on-Trent was quite far behind in terms of our degeneration processes. I think our industry continued for quite some time, which other industries in other parts of the UK went through that degeneration much quicker than we did. So I think we have an opportunity really to learn about how we can rebuild and rethink from other places, and that's something that I try to do within my work. And yes, I'm looking forward to sharing more about the way that I work, which is really to kind of look for and respond to the gaps across Stoke-on-Trent and the real opportunities and resource that I see in the city, which I see as a highly skilled, really fascinating place with really brilliant people. And yeah, that's why I based my work here, and I'm really pleased to be part of this centre launch today. I look forward to speaking more in a bit.
Fabulous. I think we're going to stay with you. We're going to do it the other way around now. So we're going to start at the end. And we know that we have a lot of projects in our expo area. And you might have a project that you want to talk about. So do you want to see if you can share with that square with the red line through it? If not, I do have the PowerPoint here as well. But do you want to see if you can share yourself? Maybe give us a 3-minute snippet about one of your projects.
If you don't mind sharing it for me, that would be really great, because I think that there is something wrong with my system here.
So you tell me.
Also, I don't mind if I've only got 3 slides anyway, and I just really wanted to have the opportunity to talk about the Portland In Project, which is one of the projects that I've been working on, which is very much informed by a lot of the other work that I've been doing in the city since 2005, which started in 2005, looking at the housing renewal process that was happening in Stoke-on-Trent and other Midlands and Northern cities, the Pathfinder scheme, where whole areas of terrace housing in particular were being demolished, and with a view to kind of rebuilding different types of homes. And the Portland In Project really comes out of that research, because as an artist, I've been really interested in how regeneration processes impact on communities and humans. And in 2013, alongside finding out I was having a baby, the £1 house scheme was launched here in Stoke. And so I applied, having been really interested in housing renewal, because there was an opportunity to think about the role that you might have as a community member in supporting community development, and that was something that really interested me. And the Portland In Project really comes out of that work. Since 2015, communities of Portland Street to sort of think about what might be needed outside of the housing. So actually what brings a community together that isn't about buildings. Yeah, the Portland In Project, although it does sort of focus on aiming to create resources. I
don't know. Sorry,
there's a bug in the machine.
I'm going to reshare. Sorry.
It does. It's okay. Think about resources that a community might need, it has focused on turning a derelict pub building into a community space and community asset. But because we haven't had that building, we've been using the street since 2016. And the street can be a workshop, an architecture school, a cafe, garden space, film club, and it has kind of changed shape. And, you know, working with the community, think about how we can rebuild our community, a kind of grassroots base. And my research as an artist has been to kind of think about what the role of the artist and the arts organisation is amongst that. And recently working on an impact case study to kind of map and track some of the impacts that we might have had. And the image you can see there is the redesign for the derelict pub building, which was street via an architecture school that we held in 2015.
10 seconds.
I went to planning department last year, and planning permission was given. So we're now working on enacting this plan, co-build with the community members who will work with us to kind of create a creative that the community needs. But I think importantly, although it's been about this building, it's very much more than that. It's about the people on the street and the skills that they might need and the skills that they already have, and about kind of being able to kind of be part of the development of our own community, as you know, a community actually that's been through quite a lot. Yeah,
fabulous. I'm going to stop you there, and and of course we're all intrigued. And there is a video in the expo area, so when we do break out in the expo area, we can see more. But I'm going to keep us a bit on time, and I'm going to move back to Fiona.
Hi, Carola. Even though you still can't see me, and I'm all ready for this. If only you could see.
So the first question is, can you share your, or do you have a PowerPoint, or do you want to just talk?
I do. I'll have a go with sharing, and let's see how we go. If not, I shall shout with you. Oops, nope, we don't want that one. Let's go again. Don't worry, we're coming here. Fingers crossed. Okay. Do this and I get back through to the beginning. Can you see that?
It's coming, and it's, yeah, first slide.
Okay, first slide. As I said earlier, just as an introduction, this whole idea of a production house was actually introduced by myself because of working in industry for a number of years. As I say, my background has been that way, and it's also been developing a number of different ideas and content creation for various channels across the UK and also in Europe and internationally too. So we're trying to think of how could we actually do that in a different way that communities could actually have their voice within that. I think when it comes to actually creating content within industry, we have a number of restrictions in place, and a lot of them are to do with audience figures and viewing figures and things like that. And there's an awful lot of amazing stories that are out there within the community that don't always get told. And I think there was a gap there. And I think, is there a way and a method that was different, that was actually to what industry was actually employing at the time, that we could actually do within in-house within a university system? And that's how it came about. And it's been tested out on a number of different areas, including working with, as I said before, with charitable organizations in the region, but also working on a number of larger scale projects outside of the region with, for example, with Erasmus funding that has supported us throughout that. This is one project, and one project was to be actually involved in telling the story, and a new story, a unique story, on the Somme in France, where we were given unique access through the work that we do with forensic archaeology. So it showed that we were working in this interdisciplinary way to actually find the stories and create new content for different platforms. So we weren't following people necessarily and what they were actually doing. We were actually creating new stories from what we were finding from our individual research when we were on location in France. If I can just move forward there. So going back to what are we about with Production House and how was it applied, it is this method as such. It isn't particularly a thing, it's a method, it's a distinctive and multidisciplinary creative practice-based approach that we use to actually factual film content creation. The example that I'm giving here is to history, but it's very much with regard to educational films too. And as Carola was saying quite distinctly, we've always talked about this sweetie and wrapper and what the model actually is. And it's intrinsically linking that us together with communities with this co-creation process to allow us to create that narrative, to pull this creation of new content that we're finding when we're on different stories that we're working on through a participatory and community focused line of inquiry, so that the content is directed from the communities themselves to create this new knowledge together. And this is where we worked on this project over on the Somme. It's very much been a case of making history come alive. And it's been very important to us to be able to work with industry partners, work with schools and communities, and bring the stories that we're finding there back into them, trying to make something much more interesting. So you can see here as a couple of examples I've got here is looking at new technologies in film, is how could maybe we could bring a soldier back to life, a real soldier, a real story that we found out there on the Somme that we could recreate, that could come into a classroom, and looking at funding bids, for example, to be able to enable. There's also
20 seconds.
There's also different VR platforms there too. In the bottom right-hand corner, you will see Andy Robertshaw, who's a military historian on various films, including Spielberg's War Horse and Sam Mendes' 1917 film. So it's very much about giving that community voice, and to be able to bring that back, make it accessible, but using different technology platforms that we can get that out to as many people as possible. And that's within heritage, with the work with this project at Hawthorne Crater, with museums, Amazon Audible, film screenings and public talks, and various events when we're actually there. So,
and again, you know, it's really so interesting that sometimes the research is not apparent as much in the film. That's the product of the process that has the innovative new insights in how to do it.
Absolutely.
So, and that's why sometimes it's difficult to understand where is the research actually. When you look at the film, it's a brilliant film. It's a unique film. It's a very insightful film. But the research lies in the process of how to make the film.
Totally, yeah, and working with the communities, and they're directing the actual narrative.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to move to Agatha.
I find it really challenging to talk about all the things I'm so passionate in 3 minutes, but I promise I'll do my best. So I will just talk about this idea of working with communities or co-creation, similar to what Fiona was talking about, in relation to creative methods. So lots of projects I've been doing for the past really 20 years. And it started with a big project for which I got some funding from the European Commission about 20 years ago, when I worked with communities, creating a really interesting photographic exhibition on communities. It's a moment when I really started thinking how working with photography and going forward film can be very, very powerful tool to really explore so many different research projects. And the one thing I would like to maybe talk about more here is this kind of slightly curatorial work I've been doing here at Staffs, and it's kind of based on some other experiences from the past. So I used to be an artistic director for the Discovering Latin America Film Festival in London in collaboration with Tate Modern and Odeon Cinemas, and I also run a couple of arts weeks at Birkbeck, where I did my PhD. And these things I'm doing in relation to work with communities, so the work I did in Colombia, the work I did in Peru, the work I did in other communities, really made me think quite a lot, as I mentioned, about the outputs and what happens with this kind of work and where it's being presented and what kind of meaning it acquires depending on where it sits. And the problem very often was that this kind of films are being presented for audiences who are already part of the community, and it doesn't really go beyond. And so all I really wanted to do following that is to facilitate more and more platforms where you can kind of meet different audiences, and you can really kind of cross the boundaries between different disciplines and hence the idea of the event I created last year with many colleagues who are here. This idea of conference/festival, communities and communication. Many of us were part of it last year. So what I decided to going forward is to expand the format and make it into conference/art film festival. So we're going to work more with local galleries as well, so kind of bringing local communities right now and focusing on this theme, which is so fascinating in relation to communities in any kind of
20
environment,
seconds.
which is diverse voices. So another thing I wanted to mention is also kind of work I'm expanding on in relation to, again, editorial jobs as well. So platforms such as International Journal of Creative Media Research, what is creative methods and research, again, are being brought together. And other things which are going to be part of the C3 Center, such as Film Art Research Practice Group, where I just want to focus on training we can do, we can give to our future PhD students who are working with practice-based research. Thank you.
Fabulous. And I feel really awful reminding people of the time, but we will have time when we go into the concluding panel. And of course, we want to allow the audiences also to go into our expo area and just maybe have a nosy around there. So I'm going to hand over to Dave next. And you're on mute. Yeah, I can see that. Perfect.
Sorry, I was just doing two things at once. Yeah, so I want to give you a quick insight into some of my creative practice, really. If I get time to show you some examples, that'll be amazing, but I'm not quite sure I'll get around to that. I'm the first to admit it is quite a very academic pursuit that I'm involved with, but I feel it does kind of open up to several areas, and it really comes alive when I'm working on a project, which I'm not going to talk about today, which is called Heat Work, but it is in the expo area, if you want to check that out. All the images in these slides are actually stills from my animations, my videos. So I borrow a lot of ideas, as I said previously, from music composition, and it's looking at ways you can translate musical composition into visual composition, and also how they interact and interrelate. And these compositions are often, in fact, everything I'm showing you today, apart from the last one, are presented at conferences and concerts nationally and internationally. So there is interest out there, I think. I think I'm gonna quickly skip through the slides and hopefully show you some YouTube clips, because it's better to see and hear the things rather than me talking about them. So yeah, the first one, sorry, this one, called Neon Vibration, looking mostly at gestural factors involved in composition and the way the animations move and how the music moves alongside it. More recently, I've been looking at rhythmic considerations and trying to integrate my interest in electronic dance music and put that into the visual realm. I think it's an understudied area of research in visual music and music generally. Okay, and even more recently, you're going to get a sneak preview of a live project that I have been working on for a while, actually, but partly because of COVID anyway, it's not actually come to fruition yet. It's kind of a little insight into what's happening. Let's see. I'm just going to share another tab.
And you've got
Great.
1 minute.
1 minute, great. Let's have a look. All right, I'll head straight to the last one, actually. So this, can you see the YouTube thing? Sorry, I'm just going to do that again. I've got a feeling it won't be sharing the audio. Let me just try again. Did you get sound?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, so this is my latest project, You can see the other projects are actually in the expo. So the stuff I talked about on the other slide, you can still see those. This is one that's kind of under wraps and emerging, I suppose. And it's integrating my EDM interests with live performance and also audio visuals.
And EDM?
Sorry, electronic dance music. Yeah. And EDMC for electronic dance music culture, which is what the journal is interested in. Yeah, so this is looking at ways of spatializing the rhythm that you might find typically in electronic dance music. I've also kind of been inspired by some of the flicker films. These are kind of quite an old thing now. Paul Sharrett, I don't know if anybody's heard of him, where it's kind of rapid switching between different frames. And it's looking at issues of synchronization and very tight synchronization.
So 10 seconds.
Yeah, I'm finished.
Fabulous. And
Yeah,
of course,
look at
you know, and that shows another sort of relationship, you know, really going into the detail, the connectivity between the visual and the sound in relation to dance music, electronic dance music. I'm going to hand over to Mark next.
Hi, let me just see if I can share my screen.
And as you can see, these are very, very short, flying through some of our practices. But of course, there are these videos also documented in the expo area.
Right, so let me see if I can do this in 3 minutes. I'd like to talk to you about a project I took part in earlier this year. I've chosen it because I think it illustrates very well the sort of things I get up to, and also because it's the latest thing I've been involved with. So it's a piece of music for 2 guitars and electronics. I composed it together with my collaborator David Cotter, who is a PhD candidate at Cambridge. The idea behind the piece of music was to control all the elements of the electronics just using the sound of the instrument, so not using any foot switches or sensors or control surfaces or wires or anything like that, but just use the sound of the instrument together with a pitch tracking algorithm to change everything in the electronic part. Because of the pandemic, it also turned into an opportunity to explore remote collaboration. So we did the project remotely, me here in Staffordshire and David in Cambridge, and that presented its own series of problems. And the title of the piece is because we decided to embrace rather than fight any latency, which is of course the thing that causes most problems when people are collaborating with tightly synchronized things online. This is a schematic of the patch, the computer patch I designed in Super Collider. Essentially, it just shows an audio input, it shows a pitch tracking algorithm, and then it shows various different scenes that you can step through with the sound of the instrument. And this is an example of the code that I actually wrote in Super Collider. You can see it's a text-based language, which has its advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are that it's very flexible, and the disadvantages are that it can be quite a challenge to program in. Then David and I created a series of gestures. This is an example of one of my gestures. We did this to control the improvisation that we were hoping would come out of this. We didn't want a completely notated score, but we also didn't want it to be free improvisation. This is the score incorporating our gestures, which David created. You can see his gestures on the right and mine on the left. These are the performance notes, quite careful performance notes that we came up with. this is the schematic of how we set it all up, with the guitar on one end going off to the internet on the other end. And then finally, this is a screenshot of the actual performance that we recorded. I think that's 3 minutes. Wow, that was good, fast.
Perfect, absolutely perfect. And again, you know, I love, you know, as I mentioned before, I used to teach 20th century graphic scores. They are a thing of beauty, and it brings the music and the performance and the instructions. How do you give instructions? How do you give the expression of an idea that starts in the mind into to communicate it to someone who can, you know, do it. So it's absolutely fascinating. Right,
Thank you.
Peter?
Thanks, Carola. So I'm not going to share my screen. I'm just going to talk to you a bit more so you can look at my picture, unfortunately. But I mentioned earlier about the film that I made a few years back in Stoke, and that film was called Soul Boy. And that had quite an interesting impact in that it created a lot of interest and desire to support the industry. And following that, there was a program of research that I took it really kind of under my own wing, without any funding in place, really. But just talking to companies and creators in the region to see how we might put a program of support together for them. And the idea came out of that to create a moving image cluster, which would bring together a group of regional and national partners to make this support happen. And gradually we built a coalition of partners and launched the cluster called Platform in 2017. And that was really about building the creative community and the creative economy around the moving image sectors in Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. And that gradually built quite a lot of interest in the concepts of using clusters outside of major cities. And in 2019, I got invited to be part of the United Nations expert group on creative economies and was in Geneva presenting Platform at the end of 2019 and speaking to colleagues across Europe and internationally about creative economies. And that idea of a cluster and working with communities in these kind of non-traditional creative regions developed a lot of interest. And that research then behind Platform found a really interesting application in how small island states, those in the South Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, in the Caribbean, could build their creative industries and their creative economies, and how they could use clusters and the relationships between industry and government and education to make that happen. These are often smaller and sometimes isolated communities, something that goes against all the normal parameters of how you make a strong creative economy work. And that work really then led to the publication of my book earlier this year by Routledge, which is about how you build sustainable creative economies in these small island states.
10 seconds.
I'm now working with the United Nations Development Programme and a couple of universities in these regions to see how we can put this into practice, something that's really important now given the impact of COVID on island states and their economies. And phew, I got through it just in time.
Fabulous. And again, it just shows that, you know, you started here, how to make that work in Stoke-on-Trent. So it's local and it has a global significance. And of course, that's what we sometimes call global. You know, you have something really significant where you can have impact locally, but it has a real global significance.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay, Neil?
Yeah, I'll have a go at sharing the screen. I was struggling with getting to grips with the tech.
Yeah, I have it here. So if you want me to share it.
That would be great, Carola, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
okay.
got it.
Yeah, and I'll just say change next slide when I'm ready. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on an ongoing project which is called Factory, which addresses the hierarchies and value systems culturally assigned to aspects of North Staffordshire's industrial craft practices. It involved 6 performances staged at Incheon World Ceramics Centre in South Korea in 2017. Sorry. I took with me to Korea 2 ex-industry personnel, China flower maker Rita Floyd, who's on the image here, and mould maker James Evans, who worked with me at Wedgwood back in the mid-1980s when we were apprenticed together. And I re-choreographed their skill alongside the culturally revered dexterity of Korean master artisans, these national treasures. So by subverting and recontextualizing their procedural knowledge from both traditions, Factory sought to expose a shared language of spatial, material and haptic intelligences, to bring into question established hierarchies assigned to modes of cultural production. You probably know that China flower making is, it's an endangered ceramic practice. It's one of the few methods of mass production that relies completely on the dexterity of the hand. And again, with changing fashion, this industry in Stoke has all but disappeared. And Rita is one of a handful of still practicing artisans who retain this knowledge. Throughout Factory, Rita provided a kind of intimate space to the audience to see this rhythmic intricacy of touch, which is evident in a craft. But my instructions were to disarm this passive spectatorship by asking her to throw away every flower she made in the production on a 6-meter production line within the gallery. And if we go to the next slide, in Korea, I also had the opportunity to work with a national treasure, Kwan Soo-so, who's renowned for the continuation of many traditional forms of ceramics, Korean ceramics. And I just directed his skill to make these partially formed moon jars. A moon jar is this kind of wonderful traditional example of Korean ceramics. And I just got him to kind of basically stick 2 bowls together, so they were kind of laden with this raw touch. And then the piece was taken into another process, mold making, which is a lesser culturally revered process assigned, well, in relation to North Staffordshire's histories of mass production, which paradoxically introduced the eradication of human touch through modes of standardization. So this
20 seconds.
So this collision of 2 distinct traditions attempted to renegotiate a sense of value to people and practices displaced through global economics on an international platform. And it was a method of reactivating obsolescence through non-commercialized production, where the holders of immaterial heritage could speak for themselves and renegotiate their own value. End. Thank you.
Fabulous. And we should actually say, and this is where I'm always fascinated how the artistic process can connect that heritage with people, with histories, with associations, with meaning, which is just absolutely always magical. So we're just slightly over time, but we're going now into the next until 1540. So 1740. So at 5:40 p.m. we come back to the concluding panel. But between now, so it's actually only 12 minutes. We didn't put anything on because we are hoping that you go into the expo area and just have a nosy around. So you've heard from our researchers and our artistic practitioners and academics, and just have a nosy around. And there will be opportunities to do much more interactive things in the tea rooms and in the pub. But at the moment, just go and have a nosy around the expo area, and then we're going to come back at 5:40 p.m. in the concluding panel. We'll see you there. Well, maybe we can make a start because there was one question that we haven't dealt with. And yes, again, for the audience members, we are recording the session as well. And that's why we don't allow anyone else to come in with a mic and with video. But after, from 6 p.m. onwards, we can browse through the coffee lounges, through the tea lounges, and also the virtual pub lounge, the virtual pub, and we can ask any questions that we have of all the members here around the panel. But maybe I can start us off, and anyone who wants to come into that question, one question that I didn't manage to ask is actually, so why do we think these lines of inquiries are actually important? So who wants to have a go?
Well, I'll jump in there, Carola, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Well, I think what's really interesting that's come out of a lot of the research that we heard about was the intersection of creative research and creative practice with other areas. You know, whether it be history, or whether it be economics, or whether it be placemaking, and I think that's really where creative research can play a role. It's not just in terms of the interest in itself, but it's how it relates to other areas and how that creative practice, creative innovation and research can apply to lots and lots of other areas. I mean, as an example from kind of my own area, which is digital creative and content production, you see the impact of immersive content on things like healthcare and construction industry, which are, you would think quite far removed from creative practice, but it's that intersection, I think, of creativity and culture with other elements of society and communities and other elements of production and research that makes it really interesting.
Absolutely. And of course, we can even add to that question. So for Neil and Fiona, which came in, the first question was, why do we think these lines of inquiries are actually important? And the follow-up question is, of course, how do we know it works? So anybody?
Yeah, Carola, I think it really does work, because I think when you're working with communities and you're working directly with them, and you're applying some of the research methods that we're actually employing, for example, with Production House, you can see the impact that's actually happening out there. I can talk about it from a perspective of education. From an educational perspective, we're seeing that schools are actually wanting a lot of the content that we're having and looking at it, whether we can actually bring it into some forms of their curriculum as well. We've had talks in the Stoke-on-Trent region, and there's been a lot of head teachers, for example, that we've actually spoken with that have really engaged with the content that we've created, so that, young people can see and understand about, say, for example, the example that we gave about First World War history, and they can see it. They can see the topography. They can actually learn about it from a different way, from the drone technologies, for example, that we use there, that you can't necessarily learn from within a book. And to actually take that into a school, and it's part of GCSE history, and to engage with that, the children that we've spoken to in the region have been so amazing with us when we've actually gone into the schools with the content that we've brought back from the battlefields themselves, that it's something that we want to pursue even further. And then we're working, for example, at the moment with the Holocaust Educational Trust to actually work with the work that they're doing with the content that we've created at Auschwitz too, so that they can actually see the content directly. So it helps education itself to see the places themselves, but also to hear from the people that are there too, the communities that are there too, the people that are in France, the people at Beaumont Hamel that we're with on the Somme, the children that are there too, that are actually surrounded by the history that we're working with every day, and also the people that we've spoken to at Auschwitz. There's been survivors that we've been working with there too, that we've got their stories on camera, that you wouldn't necessarily see on a television program that I've created before. These are hidden people. And if our research can dig that bit deeper and then bring it back, that we can embed it into education, I think it's really important. And we keep history alive as well, and the impact speaks volumes from the feedback that we've actually had from the community. And that's what we intend to do and keep doing with the different work that we're doing.
Yeah. And I want to bring in Anna and Neil, because both of your work, there could be markers like, yes, Anna, your work featured in The Guardian, featured in the Channel 4 documentary. Neil, your work was awarded really prestigious prizes. So those are, of course, markers of the significance. But, sort of locally, where do you see that it really works, that it has impact?
Is it okay if I speak,
Yeah,
Neil?
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think what's been really interesting in listening to everyone speaking this evening is that we're all involved in storytelling and, you know, supporting people to tell their own stories from their own perspective. And I think that's really important to the work that we do in Stoke-on-Trent on Portland Street. The stories that we're telling to the people there, and they don't usually get heard. And usually when you hear about these places, it's very negative, the press and media coverage. And I think it's really important that actually what we're all doing is, you know, supporting people to tell their own stories, and on those having that agency, and actually then see that their voice outside of Stoke-on-Trent, and, you know, like Neil sharing his work across the world. It's so important for kind of recognising that, you know, Stoke-on-Trent as a place and all of the skills and the amazing heritage that we have there is built up of people with individual stories. And so that for me is what it's all about people being able to tell their own stories from their own perspective.
Mm.
Yeah, I'd just like to kind of build on what Anna's said there. You know, my practice really has been a platform to celebrate this knowledge, which has been massively undervalued. You know, you speak to these people and it's just work to them. And I think it's, you know, we're in danger of losing a lot of that kind of, the nuances of that knowledge base, which is so much about the identity of Stoke-on-Trent. And it's giving them that platform to speak for themselves really. And I think I've worked with high profile venues like the V&A and the Ashmolean Museum, the Korean Culture Centre, and the kind of audiences these spaces bring in, you know, they are recognizing the importance and value of this knowledge. And I suppose the impact of it is that the Heritage Craft Association are currently working with me to map the skills which are still valid, still viable in the industry, and we should have the results out soon in September, which are going via a symposium, with the attempt really to look at strategies to work with these crafts in new ways. Not that heritage is something which is static or stuck in the past. We're looking at new ways to continue that knowledge, but then, you know, explore these the application of this craft knowledge through you know, the intersection of digital, just reorchestrating the kind of procedural aspects of this knowledge. Again, it's to move it forward in new ways, really.
Nice. And bringing in Dave and Mark, because of course music works slightly differently. It's much more ephemeral, it's time-based, it's there and then it's gone, it's more abstract. So how do you see that when it works for you? You know, what the significance of that? And I know you also work with communities, but music works, does it work the same way or does it work differently?
Well, that's a difficult one to answer, isn't it? I think we can see impact in all sorts of surprising and unexpected ways, though. I mean, the project I talked about earlier is essentially myself and David Cotter. But if I go back a few years, I was working with Matthias Müller at the Zurich University of the Arts on his sensor-enhanced bass clarinet. And from that, when we did the project in Stoke-on-Trent, the Heatwork project, I invited Matthias to be involved with that. So something that was quite esoteric then turns into something that's very, very community-based and community-driven, and a very positive experience for everyone involved. So you never know where the impact is going to come, I think. You never know when it's going to be worthwhile.
Nice.
There with talking about different projects and how it can help the community as well. I mean, we worked locally for a number of years with the House of Bread in Stafford, and there was a variety of projects that we actually worked with them, with our students as well as the work that we were doing too. But they managed together. We managed to actually help instigate to get that internationalization behind their work. And they've now started to self-create after we've actually worked with them too. So it's been able to push that further, that they've taken it on. So when I've met them for a cup of coffee, they've always been, it's been really great that we've all worked together, because we've been able to take on board the different methods and the different ways that we can actually publicize the work that we're actually doing. So they've actually taken that on board now, and they, you know, they've run with it, as we know, with House of Bread. They're an amazing charitable organisation.
Yeah,
Nice.
I think that international element is very important too. I think putting our community on the wider map, we're quite good at that, I think.
If I could just add something from my perspective here, like working with very, very small communities, indigenous communities in Colombia, I think working with creative media can really have a tremendous power to really protect local culture in a very, very significant way. So the community I was working with was subject to violence, and you know, there was a chance they could really practically disappear. And by turning to visual medium, to film, and they really gained agency to speak about the problems they had, find external allies, find funding, and effectively they became ambassadors for indigenous self-representations on a global scale. And that's really, really impressive, because if it wasn't for that, who knows in what situation they would be at the moment. So if you think about that in that perspective, filmmaking can become a really powerful tool for intercultural communication, really. And I think we shouldn't overlook that as well, because in this kind of situations, it could really be very, very significant. And also they managed to use filmmaking as a very successful tool against symbolic violence of really, really not very nice films made about the community in the 60s. And so altogether, it was just really very, very, very powerful tool for emancipation from that culture. And I thought it was really fascinating.
I think just on the back of what Agatha's saying there, it's such a powerful tool, isn't it, film, Agatha, that we can actually make changes, and hopefully make changes with different campaigning as well within what the work that we actually do.
Absolutely.
And I think,
sorry. Yeah, what I was trying to say is, like, it looks like most of us, if not all of us, really work with different kind of communities, and this idea of global approach to that is really visible and significant. So we tend to work with very small communities in different environments, but very often the significance of what they're doing and what we're facilitating here. Even the project Peter mentioned, one we're developing with the small communities in Fiji as well. It's all about that. It's all about enabling small communities to use those tools for their own benefit and really for development, and to really help their local economies, but also their culture and heritage, which is really visible with all the other projects like Neil and Anna. What you are doing is really, really linked to that idea. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, and just as a conclusion question, one thing which we are, of course, always sort of having to sort out in our minds as artists, but also as researchers, because we talked a lot about co-creating with our communities, collaborations with our communities, partnerships with other artists. So when we co-create or collaborate, is there a tension between what is your research or your practice and what is our? So the individual collective tensions.
If I can just start here, I think it's if I could describe my research, that would be what you're saying, Carol. I think it's really very visible. It's very important, and I think you need to be aware of your own positionality when you work with communities. And I think it is. The more I think about the film I made with the community in Colombia, the more I realize it's more about me as a researcher and finding my own identity as a practice-based researcher working with film, and less about the community itself. And I think it's super, super important to kind of be able to understand the reason you're doing this kind of work, especially when you work with communities for which the tool is not really, it's something new in a way for communities which were not working with this kind of practice. So there's lots of things we can learn. I think the way we should look at this is just look at those communities and just learn and understand what the situation is, and then apply it to our practice in this example, filmmaking. So,
if I can talk about music again briefly, music is an inherently social thing to do. You know, making music in communities is a very social thing, and also listening to music in communities. And I think it lends itself very well to this sort of thing. And in terms of collaboration, often there are very delineated roles, so it's very clear who's supposed to be doing what. So there's no real tension in that sense.
Brilliant.
I would say as well, I think you've always got to be very open and honest in the work that you actually create. And you might have certain ideas when you actually go into creating, from my perspective, factual content creation. But I think you always have to think about the community and the contributors that you're actually working with. And if your ideas have to change as a result of that, they do, and they should. And I think they should, you know, you should be open and honest and give that voice. And I think that is imperative.
Comes back to the storytelling aspect again, always being conscious about who's telling the story, whose the story is being told, how can we co-create those stories together creatively, but being very conscious of the tensions and the opportunities between the individual and the collective when we work together.
There's a lot of things, aren't there, as well, depending on the subject as well. There can be, you know, a lot of ethical implications with a lot of things as well, and we have to be very mindful of that and protect our contributors as we work with them.
Right. Fabulous. Go ahead, Anna. Go ahead, Anna.
Just thinking about, because the outcome of our research on Portland Street is physical change and community development. And I think it's about thinking about who owns that change and that development, and building in a succession plan, actually, so that we're part. And actually not even at the end, from.
Yeah, you're breaking up a bit, but we're almost at the end. So we've got 2 minutes to go, and it allows me to, first of all, thank everyone here in the room, our audience members, and we are very keenly aware that this was just at the moment chatting amongst ourselves. So please do join us in the virtual pub. Bring your beer, bring your wine, bring anything you have, and there the cameras can be completely open, and you can just chat or you can browse around. Click around. There's also networking possibility. When you hit on networking, it's kind of speed dating networking. So you've got 2 minutes to talk to someone else. So do try that out. You can't break anything in the system. So mosey around and see what you can see there. And then, of course, also big thanks to the whole panel. This was a really quick tour through some of our research, so some of our practices. We've got much more, but you've heard, of course, from our music team, film teams, and ceramics teams. We do have also other stuff around. We also have other stuff in the expo, but it just shows the breadth and the width of what we do here. But hopefully, we'll see you in the virtual pub, which should open in 1 minute. We'll see you there.